Hello, welcome back to Sterling Armory for our Oakeshott Typology series. And this is episode 2 in our Oakeshott Typology. We're not going to talk too much about the overall general topology, except for it is the Oakeshott studies done in his 2 books. He's done more than 2 books, but these mostly cover his topology. That's Records of the Medieval Sword, and then the Sword and the Age of Chivalry. As I mentioned in the first video, I get asked which one to buy the most, or which one is better to get, and you have to get both. They both talk about different aspects of the topology. One, Records of the Medieval Sword, is basically just showing a variety of historical examples. The Sword in the Age of Chivalry does do that, but it's near the back and it's nowhere near as much. And then the Sword in the Age of Chivalry, I think, goes much more into detail, especially the second one he publishes, which I believe is the Sword of Age of Chivalry. Yeah. Is that correct? No, this was the first one he published. So in the Sword of Age of Chivalry, especially for the type that we're talking about today, which is the type 18, he actually changes and tweaks the topology a little bit for this type in the later book. And there's many. I think it's a better way to look at type 18s in general. So what are we talking about today? So the type 18 is essentially, and before I go further, if you want to know more about the rest of the topology and what it is in general, please go back to our first episode here where I talk about the general topology, what it means, and what it's used for. And one thing I didn't stress enough, though, in that first video is something to remember is Oakeshott's topology is a modern classification system. It's easier for us to use, which is why it's used. It definitely describes a broad amount of things, but it is a modern thing. So in the medieval times, people weren't making swords saying, "Oh, I need to make a type 15 or a type 18." They just made swords to function as they needed to function. So the classification is a modern invention. So don't think that these terms were used back in the day, because they weren't. So I wanted to clear that up. I didn't say that in the first video, so I did want to add that. So going on to the type 18 for today. So what is a type 18? I think he talks about it in both books, but it's essentially the quintessential knightly cut and thrust sword. So it is it's a blade design that's been around since, going all the way back to the Roman era and even the Bronze Age. There's tons of very similar shapes, and the type of blade kind of went out of favor for a bit. The design of the blade went out of favor, and then it resurges back in the 14th century. And he attributes that to a number of things, which I mostly agree with. I think he's correct. And essentially, the type of blade is the best for cut and thrust against certain types of armor. And I also think that in the 14th century there was a resurgence of classical theory, right? And that also might have had, I could be wrong, but that also might have had a little bit of an inkling on why this blade kind of came back, because classical things were in fashion again. And the blade shape itself, not the handles, but the blade shape itself, is definitely a classical form blade shape. So what is it? So the basic gist of a type 18 is a diamond cross-section blade where it curves to a point. So I happen to have a number of type 18s with me today. It is a blade that I probably make the most of. And it's also, I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe type 18 has the most amount of subcategories of all of Oakeshott's topology, because there's so many different types of blades that can function just like that. So he has, if I can go to the book. So in the first book, I'm mixing up my books here. Apologies. I'm kind of scrambling to get videos out because we're about to go to Combat Con. So this is posting way later. But yeah, in his original book, he had 18A, or 18 and 18A. And type 18 was a single-hander. Type 18A was a two-handed version, or a hand-and-a-half version. And he might have went a little further than that. But in the updated versions, I'm switching my books here. In the updated versions, he goes into it a number of ways. So the first Type 18 is a single hand blade. Type 18 with no alphanumeric character afterwards is a single hand blade of about 2 inches wide-ish. That, as I mentioned, um, is has his edges curving all the way to a point. And this is a dedicated cut and thrust, so not dedicated for thrusting or for cutting. It's a good mixture of both. But this by itself, just the normal Type 18, comes in a lot of varieties. So I have two Type 18s here. So I have that one. And then I have one which is more in the classic Henry V shape, where it's a little bit narrower at the base and a little bit longer of a blade. But again, it's two edges coming to a curve. And notice the handles are different. Type 18s at all sorts of different handle types. Then there's 18A. Again, I'm going with the latter classification because in the original one, it was a little bit different. In the later classification, Type 18A is a slender, narrower blade. So this blade is a little bit narrower than the two we just looked at. It's a longer blade as well. So this blade is, I think they average about 32 to 34 inches in a 18A. And then the grip is now a bit longer. So it's not quite hand and a half, two hand. They average about 5 inches long. So you can get a second hand on it depending on your pommel shape. But your grip is a bit longer than a single hander. So that's your 18A. Then 18B is probably the most 18B is probably the most popular in longswords work, especially in modern times. So 18B, I have a bunch of those. So in 18B, we'll start with this one. I think you guys have seen this one in the last video. Is a much longer blade, so 34, 37-inch long blade. Also a much longer handle. And that handle, all the 18 handles, by the way, generally do a wasp. They swell in the center and have like a wasp waist look to them. And again, a much narrower and longer blade. Now, 18B is also pretty wide. So, sorry, I'm reaching here. So this blade as well. So here's where the difference is. So in Oakeshott's first book, this would have been an 18A because it has a fuller in the first third of the blade, but it is a longer blade and a long handle. So that would have been an 18A in his original book. In his newer book, I believe this would be an 18B just due to the handle difference. So basically any Type 18 with a much longer handle, but it still has that narrow and long blade. So basically a blade 2 inches wide and under would be an 18B. And then we go to 18C, which is, a lot of you guys know those as the big cutters. So 18C is basically pretty much an 18B, but now you're looking at blades over 2 inches wide. And I don't know if 2 inches is the cutoff. That's just what I've noticed from his studies. But now you have a much broader blade. I'm putting it right in front of my face. A much broader blade. These aren't quite as long as the 18Bs. I think they average around 34 inches long instead of 36, 37 because they're much wider. They're also much heavier blades. He actually makes a point in his second book describing how 18Cs are much heavier, broader blades. And he doesn't use the term heavy often, so it's interesting to see him use that. So I have that 18C. I also have another 18C. So this is probably my widest one. So they can go up to almost 3 inches wide at the base. And this one's kind of modeled after the one in Alexandria. Obviously, much different grip, but kind of modeled after the one in the Alexandria Arsenal that's held at the Met. So the blade is the same overall dimensions as that one, but I just have a different grip on it. So again, if you've noticed, the handles are very different amongst all of them. But yeah, that's generally it for the Type 18. So it's a cut and thrust blade, diamond cross section. Occasionally you can have fullers in them. It's pretty rare that you have fullers. Most of them are just diamond cross section. They're pretty light, pretty flexible blades. I think he makes a note that most 18As, the single hand versions, are around 2 pounds. And that's true. This one is just under 2 pounds. The other one I have there is just over. And they're very light cut and thrust blades. And then in the later books, the types keep going. So far we have 18A, B, and C. type 18. There's a D now, type 18D. If I'm going off memory, it's basically a much narrower, longer, almost rapier-like blade. Some of them have fullers all the way down the length of the blade. It's the only type that has fullers all the way down the length of the blade. Same profile, where it's again two edges that that curve into a point. And then most of the 18Ds are later time period, and they have complex guards to them. So almost rapier-like. Actually, not rapier. Almost side sword-like is probably the better term to use. And then 18E. Yep, there's one more. 18E are the very, very long two-hander blades that have a huge, narrow ricasso. I don't have an example of one right now. But yeah, so if you think of a big two-handed blade with a very narrow ricasso, I think a lot of people call them Danish two-handers, but they did exist in other places. That's an 18E, if I didn't mix that up. So again, lots of Type 18s, and I think the reason why is it's the most popular blade that existed at the time period. And it's just a classical knightly diamond cross-section cut and thrust sword. So yeah, it's also my favorite type, which is why I make so many of them. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, I have an Irish one here too. I haven't shown this one yet. This is an 18B. So this is another Irish blade. I have the other 18B behind me, but this is a wider 18B. And all these are going to Combat Con. And I wanted to do a video now because I have them all here. I might have some after Combat Con, but they might all be gone after that. So yeah, so that's a Type 18. In our first video in the Type 15, I did talk about there's a lot of confusion often between Type 15s and Type 18s when they start getting closer to each other, because they're both diamond cross sections, and some narrow Type 18s can start to look like Type 15s, but they have a different purpose altogether. They're not, Type 18s are cut and thrust blades. They can do both. And Type 15s are not. They're dedicated thrusting blades. So I hope that is a good video for Type 18. I'm kind of rushing through these because I have a few things we're trying to finish up, and we're trying to pack for Combat Con. And by the time this airs again, it'll be after Combat Con. So if you have any questions on Type 18s or any questions on any of the other topology, let us know. I believe I'm going to do another quick video because we have a Type 12 in that I don't do often. So I'm going to do that next. And yeah, so hopefully you like this series talking about the Oakeshott topology. And hopefully it's clearing up if you have any questions on the topology. And feel free to comment below. Please do like and subscribe. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.